Havana, Cuba. So Mark will tell us how the United States government went about kidnapping a man in cahoots with the government of Colombia and now has him in the Supermax prison. Mark Gordon.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Recently I had the honor to be asked to represent Simon Trinidad, who's imprisoned in my state. He's a political prisoner, a prisoner of war, a prisoner of the empire, and a member of the FARC-EP, which is the FARC People's Army. In his native Colombia, he's also known as the Man of Steel. That's because of his keen intellect and his solid beliefs in his cause. The thing I'd most like to be able to do, which I can't, is to read a letter or a greeting to this conference from him. But that's not allowed. He is in Florence Supermax, in an 8x11 cell, underground, cannot communicate with anyone except for a few people. He's under what's called a SAN, a special administrative measure. He can't talk to the press. He's asked to meet with International Red Cross. Can't meet with any of them. He's not allowed to. And just I have to sign the SAM to visit him and to meet with him. I'm not allowed to bring anything he tells me to the public. And this is what we call democracy in the United States. Simon Trinidad is actually from a quite, I'm going to tell you a little bit about his origin. He's from a quite wealthy family, not wealthy, but fairly well-to-do family. But through his activities in the 1980s, working with people in rural areas, he became very concerned about the rural working class in Colombia, in his native province of Cesar, in the north of Colombia, in the Atlantic coast region. In the 1980s, pursuant to a peace process, the FARC and many other broad front founded a party called the Patriotic Union, and he decided to join that. He had been a member of the Liberal Party. And at that time, he became into contact with the FARC. And what happened was that, unfortunately, or fortunately, the Patriotic Union disputed elections, 2 elections, and they got too many votes that the Colombian and their U.S. masters made them uncomfortable. And there was a wave of assassinations against people in the Patriotic Union. And in fact, there's a court case of genocide in the Inter-American Court of Human Rights. Up to 4,000 other members were assassinated. Mr. Trinidad, instead of he had a choice. He sent his family to Mexico for safety because he was starting to get death threats. And he didn't take them seriously. He was a professor of economics as well as a banker. A friend of his at the university also got a death threat and was assassinated. So he decided it's time to act. I either have to leave the country or I have to join with the FARC. At the age of 37, he went to visit the FARC leadership and asked to join. And even though at his advanced age for that kind of work, he was allowed to he was allowed to join. And he became known not as a military man, but as a thinker, as an economist, and as a peace negotiator. He was a key figure in a former peace talks in San Vicente del Caguay. He became a negotiator for the FARC and became very famous. And there's all sorts of statements from him and pictures of him there. But his main interest was in peace since his time as a young man in peace. And in 2004, he went on a peace mission to meet with a UN official in the country of Ecuador. But the Colombian government, through their intelligence, had been following him, and he was captured in Ecuador on January 2nd of 2004. He was then extradited to Colombia, and the Colombian government asked the United States government to extradite him to the United States. And their first response was no, because we don't have any crimes against him. Well, they cooked up some crimes. They did a number on him. They charged him with narco trafficking, the usual things you hear about Latin American revolutionaries or narco traffickers. All sorts revolutionaries around the world. You know, they can't be just people who believe in fighting for justice, fighting for people. They're narco-traffickers. And they also accused them of hostage taking. Well, in 2003, February 13th of 2003, the FARC had shot down a plane that contained 3 American military contractors. And they were there spying on FARC positions, sending videos back to the Southern Command in Florida that were eventually used in aggressive operations against the Colombian people. Mr. Trinidad never, ever had any personal knowledge, control, or anything over these people. But they charged him, they took him to Washington, and after 4 trials, took 4 trials, he was convicted of 1 crime of conspiracy, which all lawyers know is the most broadest thing that you could ever imagine. Colombian government wanted to make an example of him, okay? And to show that we can crush rebellion. Well, they couldn't. And he's become a symbol of resistance. He's become a symbol of peace. And there are peace talks going on in Cuba right now. To understand that you have to get rid of one lie, but there are not peace talks going on because the popular movement in Colombia is weak. There are peace talks going on in Colombia because the popular movement is strong. And they continue to fight. They're strong politically, they're strong militarily, and they can't be defeated. He's been named one of their top 5 negotiators in the peace talks in Colombia. And there is a massive campaign to get him out everywhere. The Colombian government is agreeable to him being released. The FARC have said they won't sign a peace agreement out there. The only impediment is our government here. Right. So we have to call for Simon Trinidad to be released so that he can go and do this important work for peace. And there's the free Ricardo Palmera. He's also known as Ricardo Palmera. That's his birth name. They're circulating a petition here, and they're going to be doing activities, so please sign up. And I call for the freedom of Simon Trinidad. I call for the freedom of all political prisoners, and I ask you to support the Colombian peace process. And thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Lord Burton. Our next speaker is Elhaj Mori Salakan, a metropolitan Washington, D.C. based human rights advocate, author, lecturer, and poet. He is the founder of the Coalition Against Political Imprisonment, the National Association for Police Accountability, and the Peace Through Justice Foundation, a Washington, D.C. based grassroots human rights organization. And Mr. Salakan is also the author of several books. Mori Salakan.
Bringing up a little prop because I want you all to see who I'm going to be talking about. In the name of God, the compassionate, the merciful. Back in the mid-90s, I think it was 1995, there was a hearing held in downtown Philadelphia for Mumia Abu Jamal. I remember getting on a crowded elevator, and the person standing next to me, who at the time was Mumia's lead defense counsel, was the late Leonard Winegrass. And he leaned over, I had never met him before. He leaned over to me in that crowded elevator and he said, "Congratulations on your victory on Terrence Johnson. I hope that we collectively can do the same for Mumia." That brief moment in that crowded elevator came to symbolize how I had inadvertently become the face of the campaign of a young man, a young African-American who was brutalized by Prince George's County Police when he was 15 years old, and ultimately, out of that brutalization, ended up doing almost 17 years. He was 15. And we became involved in his campaign. After the third time he was denied parole, and one of the African American weeklies did a petition drive on his behalf. That's how it came to our attention. Myself, a brother by the name of Mark Thompson, who was head of student organization on UDC's campus, a businessman by the name of Talib Ukda. The three of us formed this committee to work on his release. And after 3.5 years of dogged work in the court of public opinion, he was released. I chaired the committee. I became very closely identified with Terrence Johnson. And then something happened about within 2 years of his release. He ended up killing himself under very troubling circumstances. Shot himself. And that hurt me. It hurt me deeply, and I said out of that tragedy that I would never allow myself to become close to any case, emotionally close to any case again. And I didn't until Afia Siddiqui. Afia Siddiqui is a young Pakistani woman who came to the U.S. when she was 18 years old in 1990. She did her first year at the University of Houston, then she got a full scholarship to MIT. She went off to MIT, graduated with honors, went from there to Brandeis University, where she got a PhD in cognitive neuroscience. Brilliant young woman. Afia was also, or I should say, is also a Hafiza of Quran, meaning she has memorized the Quran. And she was very deeply committed to her faith. She was known at MIT and Brandeis for her dawah efforts and also for her humanitarian relief work. And because of this positive activism, she became a person of suspicion after 9/11, and that suspicion followed her home when she left the United States, went back to Pakistan in 2012, and by this time married, 2 young children, a third one in her belly, and just months after she gets back home, in March of 2003, she is targeted for rendition. She and her 3 young children are kidnapped, disappeared, and for 5 years no one knew where she was. And then in 2008, after 4 Arab Muslims escaped from Bagram in Afghanistan, she was kidnapped from Karachi, Pakistan, her home city. 5 years later, when 4 Arab men escaped from Bagram in Afghanistan and told stories about how they had been targeted for rendition, how they had been tortured, and they all told the story of this one woman whose name they didn't know, but they described her as a young Pakistani woman who had lived for a number of years in America, had been torn from her children, didn't know where they were. She was like a ghost prisoner to them. They would just see her from time to time, but they would hear her haunting screams on a daily basis, usually at night, because of what was being done to her. And as word got around far and wide, and people began to put pressure on the U.S. authorities who were controlling Bagram, the Pakistani authorities, because this is an American citizen, and Afghan, because this is their territory, to admit, number one, a woman was being held there, and number two, identify that who she was. We believe she is Afia Siddiqui. They released her on the streets of Ghazni in Afghanistan and then set her up to be killed. The short of it is, Afia ended up being shot. But she didn't die. She ended up getting emergency treatment, then was helivac back to the United States, where she has been ever since. 12 years of wrongful imprisonment, 5 years of secret imprisonment overseas, followed by now 7 years of torturous imprisonment on a military base in Fort Worth, Texas, Carswell, FMC Carswell. And my brothers and sisters in struggle, I'm often asked, why Afia, Brother Salakan, Mr. Salakan, Maurice Salakan. There are many cases. You've been involved in many. Why is it you feel so passionately about this woman? 1 minute. Why do you feel so passionately, as is evident, about this woman, this one prisoner? It is because, ladies and gentlemen, I think Afia Siddiqui is a litmus test for us all. If the government can get away with doing this to a Muslim woman of Afia's caliber, none of us are safe. None of us are safe. And then the last point I want to make is because the health and welfare of this potentially great but deeply disturbed nation called America is also at stake. Sheikh Ibn Taymiyyah, who if he were alive today, he would be considered a militant, an extremist. He said something that was very true then and now. Many, many, many generations ago, civilization is based on justice, and the consequences of oppression are devastating. Therefore, it is said, Allah, God, aids the just state, even if it is non-Muslim, yet withholds himself from the oppressive state, even if it is Muslim. I have 1 minute? I'm getting an extra minute, thank you so much. Well, let me say this. With this extra minute, I'm going to remind us all, especially those of us who have never visited the Jefferson Memorial in Washington, D.C., and walked up into this grand memorial and read some of the inscriptions on the wall. If you've never been there, there is one inscription that reads, and it mirrors what Sheikh Ibn Taymiyyah said many, many generations before Jefferson. And he didn't have the contradictions that Jefferson had. Jefferson wrote, I believe, in the wee hours of the morning to one of his close friends in a letter, I tremble for my country when I reflect God is just. His justice cannot sleep forever. We are here, we have convened this conference for the purpose of organizing a deeper well of pushback on the major human rights issues of the day. I pray to Almighty God that we all leave here re-energized and more deeply committed to bringing about that necessary change, because if we don't, this nation is going to be as bad as some of us think it is now. 5 or 10 years from now, if this country remains on the trajectory that it's on, it's going to be many times worse.